Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mindful Mental Jacket podcast. My name is Joe List. I am glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in, watching, listening, whatever you're doing. This is a very special episode, special guest, dream guest. We've wanted to have him for a long time. I keep saying we. It's just me here. But I've wanted to have him for a long time. Sam Harris is the guest. We got it. The golden goose, the white whale, the sexy scorpion. I don't know. I should have thought this through. I never put much thought into these intros until they're already going. But we got Sam Harris on the show. I'll keep this brief. I'm sure you're excited to hear from him. I hope you are, because he had a lot to say, and he is very, very wise indeed. If you're a fan of me, a fan of the show, you know much he means to me, and the Waking Up app has meant to me. I swear to God, I'm not getting paid to advertise the Waking Up app. You should check it out. It's amazing. It's the best place for meditation, all things mental health. So many amazing conversations on there, different meditations for sleep, meditations for children, meditations for all kinds of different stuff. There's cognitive behavioral therapy on there. There's a whole stoicism thing with William Irvine, past guest. So much great stuff on there. It's really an amazing place to be, and it's really helped me tremendously in my life. And you'll hear me say this stuff all over again in a few minutes to Sam Harris. And I just recommend getting on there. And you can get it for free, as we talk about at the end of this podcast, or you can pay for it, which, you can probably afford it. Come on, do it. But if you can't, just send him an email. Anyways, it was awesome to get Sam on, and I think it was great. It was great to hear Sam. I'm getting a text right now. I shouldn't try to read it. It was great to get Sam on the show. He was full of wisdom, as always, and I was a bumbling dipshit a couple times. You get excited to have the conversation, and then, I'm nervous, and I allude to it. I'm like, I should have meditated before, because I had all these things I wanted to say and talk about, and now I just laid in bed all night staring at the ceiling being like, that's not the way I wanted that to go. I wanted to talk about this more. I didn't say what I actually meant because I was distracted. But all in all, I think it was great. As always, Sam has a lot of tremendous wisdom, and I hope you'll get a lot out of this episode. And that's about it. Let's get right to it. Well, I do want to plug some shit. I got May 2nd, Regent Theater in Los Angeles, downtown LA, right on Skid Row. Get yourself some tickets. I'm excited for that show. I got some fun special guests. And make sure you subscribe to this podcast. Tell a friend. We're having great conversations on here. A lot of comedians, but also a lot of mental health people, Buddhists, teachers, psychologists. It's a good pod. And subscribe to this channel. And if you haven't already, go check out my specials. I Hate Myself, this year's material, and Enough for Everybody. I can't even remember myself. I get confused myself. Pauly, Goodfellas. And also, we talk about at the end of the episode, we talk about 4th of July, the movie, which is now available on Amazon and iTunes. You can go rent it. You can go purchase it on all those places. It's not just on Louis' website anymore. It's all these other places, much more accessible. And so go check it out. You'll hear Sam Harris is a fan of the film. So go check it out and come back again. Come visit us again here at Mindful Mental Jacket. It's a great pod. And thanks for listening as always. Be kind to yourself and enjoy this conversation with my pal and spiritual guide, Sam Harris. All right, I'm here at Dream Guest. We did it. We pulled it off. Sam Harris is here. Hi, Sam.
Great to see you, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm really excited to have you. I'm terrified. I'm not an interviewer, and it's funny because I listen to Waking Up app constantly, all day, every day. It's like my keeps me on an even keel. And now I'm interviewing you, and it's just terrifying. I need to be listening to you while listening to you.
Well, nice. I'm glad that you're finding it useful. That's awesome.
It's life-changing. I talk about it all the time on this podcast. Nobody listens to this podcast, but I'm talking about it.
We'll try to change that.
Yeah, please. So the Waking Up app, if people don't know, I mean, this whole thing, I just want to be a commercial for your app, not because I think you need help, but I want people to have this experience that I've had, because it's a really amazing place to find not just meditation, but so many different things. You have, cognitive behavioral therapy is on there. There's travel stuff. This Amanda Knox series is really amazing. I mean, I listen to everything on there. and it's like a one-stop shop for mental health. So I guess to start off, I assume a lot of people know who you are, but maybe people don't know. Many people don't know you as a meditation Buddhist spiritual guy. They know you as, a Trump-hating, Islamophobe, horrible guy that fought Ben Affleck, fist fought Ben Affleck. So, which are all not true.
Don't all those go together? I would assume you would just get one out of just you get them all if you only had one of those pieces. But
well, you have to be the most misunderstood person in America, don't you think? I think.
Yeah, although that gets worked to my disadvantage because I complain so much about being misunderstood that it's now kind of it's just a running joke. But honestly, I don't think I'm too terribly biased in thinking that my positions on a wide range of controversial topics do get systematically lied about more than most, and I'm not quite sure why that is. I've had the bad sense to touch almost every third rail I could find, but I'm is that I'm in the political center effectively on most questions, even though I've always thought of myself as a liberal. Effectively now I'm in the center given what's happened to the Democrats and the left in our politics. So I don't really have people reflexively defending me on the left or the right, and I get criticized from the left and the right with equal ferocity by turns. So there's just much more. Like I'm not really in a tribe, and I offend more or less all tribes. So yeah, I get a lot.
Yeah, there's an Eddie Vedder lyric.
Meditation keeps me sane.
Yeah, there's a lyric I think of, but for Eddie Vedder, I wrote it may be lonely because it's not paved. Very, very wise indeed. But anyway, so the reason I bring it up is because a lot of times I'll bring up the Waking Up app to people and meditation, and I say Sam Harris, and they're like, oh, they're mad at you for one reason or another. So I guess maybe just give people a brief history of your meditation studies, your spirituality, and all the side of you that people maybe don't know, that you've been meditating for all these years and you've gone on retreats and all that stuff.
Yeah, so when I was an undergraduate in college, in my sophomore year, I got into meditation and wound up dropping out to really to focus on. I was also writing fiction, and so I thought I was going to write the great American novel. So, and then no one really cares if you graduate college if you actually do that. So, I dropped out to write and also study meditation. I spent a fair amount of time on silent, mostly Buddhist meditation retreats. Through my 20s. I was out of school for about over 10 years. I think it was 11 years between my sophomore and junior years. And then I spent a lot of time in India and Nepal studying with in the end mostly Tibetan Buddhist Dzogchen teachers. Dzogchen is the practice I finally landed on. But I spent a lot of time doing Vipassana practice, which is the tradition in Theravada Buddhism that has given us the mindfulness revolution that so many people are aware of. So I was practiced mostly in a Buddhist context, but not exclusively. And I also made an independent study of religion in general, right? So I was reading not just Eastern religious texts, but Western ones. I grew up in a totally secular context. I was not indoctrinated into anything. I mean, I'm nominally Jewish, but I wasn't bar mitzvahed. My mother asked me if I wanted to go to Sunday school like my friends, and I said, why would I want to do that? And she really had no answer for that. And so that's where that was kind of the last stop on the train out of any formal adherence to Judaism. So but I also grew up without any God talk. I mean, I was not raised an atheist either. But I was effectively one when I went to college, and even when I went to India and Nepal and began studying esoteric things like meditation. The entry point to my interest in meditation was an experience with MDMA, which I'm happy to talk about if that interests you. But eventually, it was much more about practicing meditation in a fairly intensive way, and Eventually, I decided I needed to. I was no longer writing fiction. I wanted to write nonfiction about the nature of mind. I spent a lot of time reading and writing in philosophy on my own, and recognized that everything I was doing was going to be unpublishable, but for my getting some real academic training. So I went back to Stanford, it was happy that I was at Stanford, because Stanford, I think, is the one school in this country that you can't really drop out of. I mean, usually when you leave school and you don't go back for some years, you get dropped from the roles, and then you'd have to reapply. And that wasn't the case for me going to Stanford. So I just showed up after 11 years, and I was in the computer, and then I finished my degree in philosophy. And I was going to do a PhD in philosophy, just continuing to read and write in that vein. But I wanted to know more about the brain. If I was going to write about the mind and even do moral philosophy, I wanted a much firmer ground in the science, such as it was in our understanding the mind from the side of the brain. So I wound up doing a PhD in neuroscience instead of philosophy. But my interest in neuroscience have always been very philosophical. I've wanted to understand human subjectivity and morality and just our conception of how we should live in the light of all we're coming to understand about ourselves and the universe. And it was always obvious to me, and it became increasingly so, that religious sectarianism was the wrong way to frame our existential concerns, and that all of our religions had to be wrong about almost every respect, and yet that there still was a baby in the bathwater we wanted to save, which was the depths of contemplative experience and ethical insight that are available. But of course, those are by definition non-sectarian, are by definition deeper than any one parochial construal of what is real. I mean, the truths of spirituality and ethics can't be Christian or Muslim or even Buddhist, right? I mean, it's deeper than that. We're talking about the human mind in a culturally universal way, ultimately. So I started my neuroscientific research studying belief and disbelief and uncertainty at the level of the brain. I was doing fMRI studies of people. And just as I was beginning my research, this was at UCLA now, September 11th happened, and people started flying planes into our buildings for explicitly religious reasons.
Right.
And then we had a culture that was so committed to its own religious fantasies that very few people were going to admit that this was a religious problem, right? This is a problem of religious fundamentalism. This was not economics. It was not any sort of normal politics. It was not even, as much as we had done wrong in the world, it was not a direct consequence of U.S. foreign policy. No, these were people who thought they were going to get directly to paradise or dying in the right circumstances, killing infidels and apostates and Jews, etc. So I literally on September 12th, I started writing my first book, The End of Faith, which was my reaction to September 11th and to the confusion that I was seeing immediately around that. And that pitched me into many culture war issues, because that was really a broadside against organized religion in general and Islam in particular. But, I spent a lot of time on Christianity and Judaism and other religions too. And then I spent, I wrote another book, A Letter to a Christian Nation, which was a response to the Christian pushback against the End of Faith. And all of this delayed my finishing my research at UCLA by a few years. But then I eventually went back to the lab, finished, and then since then have been writing books and speaking on a wide variety of topics that lie at the intersection of questions of human well-being, ultimately, and science and public policy and politics ultimately. And so I can more or less on my own podcast, not so much in Waking Up, but on my podcast, Making Sense, I can really talk about anything that I think is of consequence and that interests me, and I tend to do that. So I'm all over the place, and getting a fair amount of pushback when I hit these culture war issues. But that I think that wasn't it wasn't so brief, but that gives you a good sense of what I've been up to.
No, we're out of time, but I do think this is one of our best episodes. No, well, that's what's so interesting, because I'm also a huge fan of Making Sense podcast, and I listen to every episode of that too. And it's funny because it's a balance, because I'll listen to making sense, and you're talking about how we're completely doomed because of AI or whatever, climate change. I just had a baby like 4 months ago, and it's just hopeless. It just sounds really awful. So you really just bum me out there, and then I swing over to waking up, and I'm like, I can't control any of this, and it puts me in a nice meditative state. I mean, is that what you do? I mean, how much do you get out of?
That's the business model.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You have both sides, which I try to do myself. I have one podcast about, would you eat your father's cum for money, and I have another one about meditation and mental health, which you're on that one, thankfully. But
good. Hopefully, yes. I forgot to check which one I was going to be on.
Hi there, folks. This episode of Mindful Metal Jacket is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is the best. You got to get therapy. We talk about it right here in this episode. I love therapy. I need therapy. I went to therapy today, goddammit, to talk about how I wish I had done this interview better. Anyways, whether you're on Tinder looking for your soulmate or your focus is on learning to love yourself, talk therapy can help you to navigate relationships. Boy, we all need help navigating those damn relationships. BetterHelp matches you with a licensed therapist who is available by phone call, by message, I wish that didn't happen, or by video chat. Everything is done online, so you can do therapy from the comfort of your own home, not on some office couch. Who wants to lay on a couch with a bunch of dorks? I love therapy. I went to therapy as a child. I went to therapy in my 20s. I started going in my mid-30s, and I never looked back. I'm still going. That's all I do is look back. And I look back fondly. I love it. BetterHelp is flexible, works with your schedule. If you need to have your session on your lunch break, they can make that happen. When and where you do therapy is totally up to you. Now, do this right now. Become your own soulmate, whether you're looking for one or not. Visit betterhelp.com/metal, METAL, today to get 10% off your first month. That's 10% off for a month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/metal, betterhelp.com/METAL. All right, that's it from me. Back to the show. I guess, I have a whole bunch of questions here that are kind of all over the place, but mostly I want to talk about meditation, spirituality. Now, but you don't consider yourself a Buddhist, but that's the religion that you've gotten the most from. I really think it's an interesting thing. I've heard you say somewhere on a debate you were having somewhere with somebody that it feels like if you open some Buddhist texts to a random page, it's helpful. But if you open the Bible to a random page, I'm paraphrasing, it's not going to be so helpful. Right. Is that about the point you were making? Is that somewhere?
Yeah, that was a way of illustrating that there's just so much more signal to noise with respect to insights into the nature of mind and the nature of human consciousness that can be used in a modern and secular context in the Buddhist tradition versus any of the Abrahamic ones, right? You open the Quran or the Bible or to either of its larger sections, old or new, and you're likely to get some story about either how to sacrifice a goat or what under what circumstances should you kill people for thought crimes, or just a lot of bogus history or semi-bogus history about who killed who and why, and why it was justified to take their girls as sex slaves and kill all the boys. There's just a lot in there that's just sheer barbarism of the sort that we see displayed in certain cultures still. Like you look at the Taliban in Afghanistan or the Islamic State, right? I mean, those are groups of people who, in the Islamic context, are really trying to live by the letter of the law, in this case, a 7th century law. But the same would be true if you had tried to live by Leviticus or Deuteronomy. But in any case, my general point here, which is not one that most atheists were making when I became a prominent atheist, is that all of our religions are different, right? To treat them all as the same and making the same errors and equally culpable for those errors of where where they're in conflict with science and equally dangerous and divisive, it's just not true. I mean, really, there's a wide variety of commitments, ethical and otherwise, that our various religions argue for, and they're quite different. There really is one religion of peace. It's Jainism. I mean, it is a straight up religion of peace, and so we just don't have to worry about the Jains. We're never going to have Jain suicide bombers. Right, we'll have Jains that starve themselves to death because they can't figure out what to eat, or they become paralyzed by their pacifism. but you're never going to get a group like Al Qaeda that is organized around the principles of Jainism. It just doesn't make any sense. And and then there are just many differences between our religions. And so yeah, there's the strange thing about insight into the nature of mind, insight into the nature of consciousness, the sort that we're going to talk about, is that in the Eastern tradition, it is trivially easy to find texts that describe it just with absolute clarity in a way that really does not require any significant editing in a modern context, right? Like you can find a pure channel of just kind of first person scientific, introspective insight about about what it's like to be you if you could only pay sufficient attention without the necessity of believing in anything, or asserting anything on faith. It really is a kind of recipe for building a laboratory within your own mind, by which you can make certain discoveries. Whereas in the Western context, religiously, yes, you can fight your way through to some mystical and analogous series of insights. Like in the Christian tradition, you can find a 13th century contemplative like Meister Eckhart, who said many seemingly Buddhist things about the nature of his own consciousness. But of course, the Inquisition was just getting ready to burn him alive when he happily, died of natural causes, right? So it's like there are reasons why these kinds of insights weren't well established in the West, and because they are in many cases heretical in the context of a faith-based propitiatory religion like Christianity or Judaism or Islam.
Right. Now, one of the things that's such a great insight about your meditation app and your style of teaching meditation, which I guess is closest to Dzogchen. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean that's been the most influential practice on me, but there are many analogous non-dual traditions of teaching within Buddhism and in the Indian tradition generally.
Right. So one of the great insights I got from your meditation app that's so different than many is not just to focus. Maybe you can explain a little bit, because you explain it in so many different ways on the app, and I'm imagining a lot of the people maybe aren't familiar with maybe meditation at all, or just the general meditation of kind of focusing on your breath. But you talk a lot about, I mean, I guess there's so many different ways to say it, but emptiness, or looking for the looker and realizing there's nothing there. And I guess maybe you could just kind of talk about that practice, because I struggle, because it makes perfect sense to me, and it really helped change my life and helped to alleviate my OCD and my hypochondria. And it's the best meditation I've ever done. I'm going to keep pushing your app, as I do to many people. And then I try to, they'll say, well, what's so different? What is it? Tell me about it. And I try to explain sort of the concept of emptiness and the small self and the egoic self, and you're not actually thinking these. I get into free will, but I'm just not smart enough. I'm very dumb, Sam. And it makes perfect sense to me, but it's so hard to translate. So what is different about your app? And if you had to just give this basic idea of looking for the looker, having no head, these things that, again, I've tried to explain, and I had Richard Lang on my podcast at one point, but maybe you could give a little bit of insight there, that every time I hear it, it's like, it's wonderful and helpful, but I'm not good at translating it, but I'm not a meditation instructor, and I'm an idiot.
Yeah. Well, I think, let me see how the best way into this is to describe the starting point that is true for something like 99.9% of people who attempt to meditate. I mean, you get interested in meditation somehow. Someone suggests to you that you might want to notice how out of control your mind is, or you just or become interested in why you suffer psychologically. Why do you feel anxious? Why do you feel regretful? Why are what can you do? Is there anything you can do with your attention to feel better in the moment that doesn't require you changing the world, right? Like that you can do before you get the job you want, or get the relationship you want, or get the other, arrange any of the furniture out there in the world that suggest that you imagine would make your life better, and is the cause of you feeling crappy on some level, right? Is there something you can do right now, before you get the results of your MRI, that you're anxiously waiting for, um, to feel tranquility, to feel at peace, right? And so and meditation it's not the only thing that is recommended in that space, but it is one of the most common, because it is just a fact about us that we spend almost all of our time lost in thought, right? And the character of those thoughts tends to be fairly unhappy for most of us. I mean, there's some people who have an inordinate level of happiness, justified or not, and they're in many ways very, very lucky. But most people will be familiar with this sense that they wake up in the morning and they're just, from the moment they open their eyes, or even before, the thought machine has started up, and they're effectively chased out of bed by their thoughts, and they think all day long until they struggle to fall asleep later that night. And that most of their thoughts are not thoughts about how good life is and how grateful they are for the wonderful people they have in their lives, and how they're so satisfied that they've gotten so much of what they desire in life, and they really can just relax, and it's just it's all good now. And this is they recognize that billions of people on Earth would consider their prayers answered if they could only trade places with them, right? I mean, they're just so fortunate. If anyone who has the time to listen to this podcast is almost certainly extremely fortunate. And if they're lucky enough to not be in the grip of some recent bereavement or their own medical emergency, they're enjoying this moment in the sun where it's just everything is good, and they can just relax and be totally happy, right? While that may in fact be true of many people, they're not experiencing themselves that way. They're tending to think about what they wish they had, and almost had, and could have had, and may yet get if they can only get out of their own way. And they're worried about their relationships and the people in their lives, and they're conflicted about various things, and they're just a tangle of in many cases conflicting desires and reactions to life. And there's a sense that their mind is out of control, right? And what the first thing that happens to you when you try to meditate, when someone says, okay, listen, your mind's out of control, you can actually take some control over it. You can improve the situation. And here's a technique. Just pay attention to the breath, right? It's the simplest thing in the world. You always have it with you. You don't have to believe anything about God or Jesus or Krishna or anything. Just pay attention to the breath. And every time your mind wanders, bring it back to that object of attention, right? And see what happens. And the first thing that will happen is, or maybe the second thing, I mean, the first thing might be that people will be so distracted and deluded by their identification with thought that they'll think they've succeeded when they haven't, right? They'll close their eyes, they'll pay attention to the breath, they'll get lost in thought, and think something that they're only dimly aware of. And then when you ask them after 5 minutes what that was like, they'll say, oh, that was nice. Yeah, I was just paying attention to the breath, and it was all fine. And so I didn't really feel anything strange happen, but it seemed fine. Right. But they don't even have enough concentration to notice that they were lost in thought every second of those 5 minutes. Right. So, once you get past that stage, which might last for a while for people, you get to the stage where you notice the difference between being lost in thought and coming back to the object of meditation, in this case, the breath. And you notice how difficult it is. You notice how your attention is always being buffeted by discursive thought. You're trying to meditate. It should be simple. Just feel this next in breath, and yet immediately this voice or this stream of imagery comes online, and you're carried away by it. Into a kind of waking dream where you're just, you thought you were meditating. You were supposed to be meditating. Now you've completely forgotten that the project even exists. And you're thinking about lunch. You're thinking about that thing, your wife said to you that didn't quite sound right. And who the fuck does she think I am now? I mean, can't she see how hard I'm working? Now you're talking to yourself, right? As though there's two of you, right? As though there's one of you who's thinking the thoughts, and the other of you, there's another person in there apparently who's hearing the thoughts, who needs to hear this stuff. It hasn't heard it already, apparently. You just, so that there's a conversational structure to all of our self-talk, which is, frankly psychotic. Um, and yeah, so that's the starting people, right? So they're talking to themselves all day long. Most of the self-talk is fairly unpleasant. Their sense of who they are as beings in the world is really trimmed down by that automaticity, just that moment by moment um, conceptualizing and discursively rehashing everything, and they're making very little contact with experience as it is in the present moment, really. And even when you're getting what you want, even when it's just, you're finally getting your hands on this thing, right? After, weeks or months or years or however long it's been, you're trying to get to this moment. The vacation has finally arrived, the promotion has finally arrived, whatever it is, you won the award, you got the Netflix deal, something happened, it's great. And now your only capacity to enjoy this thing is to think, 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 think in the presence of it. And so much of that thought is sort of overshooting the mark, and you're now thinking about what's coming next, right? Now, what's the next thing? You got to now this thing you thought you wanted, which in fact, is the culmination of all you're desiring. It has this mirage-like quality that when you arrive at it, there's no there. It's like, okay, you've gotten to this new place, and you might feel, this dopaminergic, satisfaction that lasts for minutes or hours or even days, but very, very quickly, I mean, far shorter than days, you begin to get lost in this new mode of seeking the next thing on the basis of this good thing that just happened, and you never arrive. So meditation becomes a technique of learning how to truly arrive in the present moment and find some real tranquility there, to find a kind of an intrinsic well-being that is available when you can just put down your weapons for a few minutes, right, or even seconds, and come to rest, right? I mean, well, just allow the war to be over for a moment, right? And that comes as quite a relief to people, and it becomes a kind of amazing superpower because you can really decide to get off the ride whenever it becomes unpleasant. The moment you get angry or annoyed or impatient, that can become a kind of mindfulness alarm, and then you can just ask yourself, is anger useful now? Like, how do I really want to be angry for the rest of this conversation, right? Or for the rest of this interaction with somebody? Do I really want to be motivated by this energy? And if the answer is no, which it often is, I mean, I would say 99% of the time it actually is, you you actually have the power to just release the anger at that point, and the physiology of it diminishes very, very quickly. And then so it is amazingly useful. And yet to come to, to finally at long last, to come to the real crux of your question, that this is really just the first stage in the journey of learning how to practice and having insights into the nature of mind. And because this kind of mindfulness is still dualistic, it still presumes that there's a meditator, that there's a self who can pay attention and be identified with thought or not. Um, and there's a deeper insight to have, which is that there really is no center to experience. It's not that you are this unchanging subject that can decide to meditate or not, that can be distracted or not, uh, that's on the edge of your experience, having the experience, right? Because that's what it feels like for most people most of the time. It feels like there's experience, there's all the seeing and hearing and smelling and tasting and touching and thinking and feeling, but then there's me on the edge of it, right? I'm the subject. I'm the meditator who's trying to pay attention. I'm the one who can aim attention into this theater of sights and sounds and sensations. And so it seems like there's two things. There's the subject and then all of the objects of consciousness. Whereas if you really look for the subject clearly, it it disappears, right? And it might appear for an instant in the beginning, but you can learn to recognize that instant and use that instant as the basis of your mindfulness practice, which is to say that's the thing you become mindful of when you're no longer distracted, right? You can just keep falling back into this open condition where you recognize that there's just experience as a matter of experience. I'm not making any metaphysical claims about the nature of the universe. I'm saying on the first person side, if you look closely enough, you will see there is just experience, right? There's not an experiencer having the experience. That's just, if any feeling that that's the case is more contents of experience, right? There's just this condition that, I'm calling consciousness or awareness for, I use those words interchangeably. And it really is unified with its contents, right? I mean, the energy that you feel as your body, the energy of light and color and shadow that you see in your visual field, the thoughts you think, the emotions you feel, all of this is happening in a space of conscious awareness, which, if you look closely enough, doesn't feel like I, right? Because the feeling of I is yet another wrinkle in that space. It's another adumbration of this kind of totality of energy. And you can just keep dropping back into this condition of simply witnessing everything that's appearing, thoughts and everything else, from this prior state of just being the condition in which everything is appearing all by itself. And you can begin to feel that doesn't feel like I, right? There's just this openness. There's just this condition, which is, again, you're not on the edge of it. There's just the feeling that you're on the edge of it, looking into it, is again another appearance. It's a kind of contraction, right? Which you can become more and more sensitive to. And as you lose that, as you begin to feel your way, past that, that becomes a new style of mindfulness practice, which is explicitly non-dualistic. And again, and Dzogchen is a traditional form of teaching about that in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And but there are others. I mean, Zen gets at it in its own way, albeit in a way that I think is less precise, but ultimately identical. The Advaita tradition in what is nominally called Hinduism, although somewhat misleading, in the Indian tradition is also non-dual, and there are intimations of this teaching all over the place. In some cases even in the Western canon, but it's most clearly laid out in Buddhism. And anyway, I'm giving you all these short answers. This is like this is rapid fire.
I know. I'm like, I got so many questions. I haven't even got to a single one yet,
Yeah.
but because this is all just set up. And that launches me to so many different ways to ask questions. And it is a great feeling when you can get into that feeling of just consciousness. And another direction you give often is to focus on feelings in your body so closely that your body kind of can disappear. Because when you're closing your eyes, you think you're feeling a foot and a hand and a leg, but those are just concepts that you're actually feeling tingling or heat and stuff like that, which is all wonderful and good. And again, it's helped me tremendously. But I guess one question is also, how do you manage, or do you manage to do that in conversation? I mean, you're someone that debates people or is misunderstood a lot. When someone's going, yeah, but you said this, this, and this, Sam, are you using that practice then? Are you still feeling like I'm not a self, I'm just listening? I mean, I guess I don't know how to word this question. Do you feel anger and rage, or how do you get off the ride in that moment? Or how do you use it practically in stressful situations, in situations like that?
Yeah,
or do you not?
Well, it's what I tend to notice. I notice it all the time. I mean, I notice it punctuates my experience a lot, right? So I'm constantly noticing this about the mind. But then I get lost in thought, or I contract in reaction to something that's happened, right? And if the contraction is strong enough, I tend to notice that as a kind of mindfulness alarm. I mean, the place where I'm least likely to notice this, or the most likely to overlook what I'm calling non-duality, is when things are when everything's great and I'm just pleasantly distracted by something, right? I'm looking at I'm reading something, I'm reading a book, and I'm just interested in it, or I'm watching a film, and it's captivating, and there's nothing that's sharp, nothing that's causing me to really kind of sharpen up my attention with respect to this. I'm pleasantly kind of lost in the dreamscape of just something that seems worth paying attention to. But when I start to suffer, when I become acutely unhappy, when I get jabbed by something, that tends to function as a kind of mindfulness alarm for me, because then it just makes me vigilant, and it makes me feel like, okay, this sucks. How long do I want this to suck for? Right? How long do I want to feel this way? And is it useful? And so I can tend to just release that contraction and reaction pretty quickly, but sometimes sometimes it feels warranted to be outraged, right? Sometimes the energy of anger seems appropriate and seems necessary to actually functioning effectively in certain moments. So I tend not to get rid of it as quickly as I might have in certain moments, just because it is the thing that is that's allowing me to rise to a specific kind of challenge, I think. So I'm not always, I don't always sound like a pushover or sound, purely acquiescent to, some challenge, rhetorically. It's like there are many places on my podcast where I definitely can sound irritated, and because I am irritated. And then the question for me is, and this is well, maybe a different way to put this. I don't think it's rational for anyone who's learning to meditate, and really no matter how much they do it, to expect that any specific negative emotion will never arise ever again. Right. I mean, that may be true in certain extreme cases where someone becomes, fully enlightened, or they fully stabilize this practice. But I think it's much more reasonable to expect, and in some ways this is good enough, that everything will continue to arise as before, but the half-life of negative emotion will become much, much shorter, and it can become arbitrarily short, which is to say you can really decide to cut through it more or less instantaneously if that's what's warranted, and that's what you want to do. And my experience is that I do get irritated, I do get angry, I do get impatient, and all of that, but I let go of it as soon as I can, and I can do that pretty quickly, right? And there's just a few places where it seems even just kind of theatrically appropriate to maintain some edge in, like, it's a more interesting conversation if I am if I turn down the screws a little bit harder than even as necessary, just because it is a kind of ethically appropriate, and it's just I recognize there's an audience there that wants, so some version of a collision on any given topic. And so sometimes I might do that when I really could just let go of it sooner, let go of that energy sooner.
Now, this is something I always wanted to ask you about too, because I listen to I do I'm a complete lunatic. I got OCD and panic disorder and all the stuff, and so I've done therapy. I go to therapy. I meditate. I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I work these things all the time, which I have questions for you about. Also, I'm interested in your thoughts on that. But what about talk therapy and all these things? I never hear you mention any of these things, because I think I listen to you and it's like you can just let go of anger through meditation and notice that it's just an appearance in consciousness, and the half-life and letting go. Do I want to feel this way? Do you think that people can do all this just through meditation and recognizing this is just an appearance in consciousness? Because some things might be deep-seated issues from childhood trauma and all these things. Do you feel there's more to it, or can people just do, like, let's say somebody was abused as a child, which I wasn't, just on a person, I don't want to make it seem like that, but somebody was, horribly physically abused as a child, is meditation enough, or do they need therapy or a psychotherapy or all those things also? Or can you just achieve peace through recognizing this is an appearance in consciousness and letting go? I guess I'm just going to paddle that over to you with all that mumble jumble, if that's a question.
No, it's a good question. I suspect that ultimately meditation might be enough, but I think it can be very effective and wise to kind of work on yourself on, in other modes, right? The example I often use in this case, from my personal experience is, having a fear of public speaking, right? Like you could use mindfulness just to deal with that, right? So like every time you confront this anxiety about going out on stage, you can feel just the pure physiology of it, and recognize that it has no real meaning. I mean, it's at the level of its raw experience, it's analogous to, indigestion or, a pain in your elbow or something that really doesn't map back on to who you are as a person in the way that anxiety seems to when you're busy thinking about, why am I such a schmuck who can't get out on stage and feel good about it. And so you just release all the self-judgment and you just feel the raw sensations, and you just let them, you just let that buzz happen and kind of use it as energy. It's definitely a good thing to do. And it's one remedy. And I think that's ultimately, it could be a perfect remedy if you became mindful enough that you could just let everything, free fall. And never cling, never identify with anything that's coming through consciousness. Ultimately, I think you'd probably be fine. But there are much more efficacious ways to work on an anxiety like fear of public speaking than that. Or like cognitive behavioral therapy is probably a better approach. And on some level, there's no substitute for doing the thing you're anxious about and learning that you can get to the other side of the anxiety. You can get rewarded by having good experiences doing it, and then that reward can sort of ingrain its own new associations with this thing you've otherwise been inclined to avoid, right? And you can get better at it, and you can feel some increased competence there, and you can have new concepts and new expectations around it, right? You can reframe things. It's not just a matter of feeling things non-conceptually through mindfulness. You can just consciously reframe the experience. Like you can notice that anxiety feels rather a lot like excitement, right? And it just has a different sort of cognitive frame around it, right? The things that excite you, for which you're willing to pay some money to experience, whether that's a roller coaster or something else. That's very much like anxiety, and yet it gets coded as positive, whereas the clammy dread you feel, having to go out on stage, gets coded as negative. You can work with all of that conceptually in a way that is sort of ancillary to being mindful, and actually make a lot of progress. And perhaps understanding, to moving to other psychological issues. Maybe understanding their origins gives you some new tools by which to make progress, right? So, I think you can do all of it, and I think they're all complementary. I wouldn't, and taking medication when medication is what's useful is also totally valid in my view. So I think you use anything that works.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I assumed you felt that way, but I was always interested in the idea that, you can just let go of the physical feelings, but I think it's also helpful to go. Maybe you're afraid of getting on stage because, when you were a kid, your, dad hated you, whatever stuff that you talk about in therapy and all those things. But I think they all work well, sort of in concert together. But sometimes I'll go to therapy and be like, well, it's just an appearance in consciousness, so I'm just letting go of that anger. And my therapist goes, well, why let go of it? Why not confront the person? I mean, so there has to be a space to confront people too. I mean, I guess I'm asking the same question, but a little more pointed. Like, what if you're fighting with a spouse and she doesn't do the dishes, whatever it is you're just angry about? Can you just let go of that anger, or is it worth it to say, let me confront this thing instead of just letting go of the sensation?
Yeah, no, I think there are problems we want to confront, but the question is, how contracted do you want to be, if at all, while you confront them?
Right.
Right. Like, is the anger useful when you're actually having the conversation about the dishes? And I would argue that it almost, always is something that's just going to compound the problem, right? It's going to make the conversation harder to have in a way that converges on something, mutually beneficial, right? It's like you want to, in relationship, I think you want to be sensitive to anything that's causing you to overlook the fact that you actually love this person, right? I mean, like you can no longer feel that you love them in that moment because you're so contracted around the dishes or whatever else it is. I mean, the relationship's the perfect case that argues for a kind of a multimodal approach to this stuff, because as mindful as you can be, I mean, you can keep letting go of your own suffering, your own contraction. You can keep trying to become a truly compassionate and tranquil side of the conversation, whatever that conversation's about. But it also could be true, as has been true of me in my own marriage and in my own parenting, that there's certain things I'm just not good at, right? Like I'm just not a good communicator about certain things and in certain modes, right? And so it's like I'm continually stepping into the same problems again and again and causing, unnecessary suffering for myself and others just because I'm bad at certain things, right? So, mindfulness isn't the all-accomplishing tool that just will give you knowledge you don't have, right? I mean, it allows you to release your reactivity, which is good. But if you don't know, if you can't speak Chinese, before you become perfectly mindful, you're not going to be able to speak Chinese after you become perfectly mindful, right? So there's specific skills that we all want and should want, and having them will matter in certain circumstances, and not having them will also really matter. And yes, you can be mindful of kind of sort of walking through the rubble of your life as you break things, but I think I would say that's not good enough. I mean, I wouldn't say you couldn't become a Buddha like that, but you might lose your marriage and several other things in the meantime.
I'm trying to lose my marriage, but she keeps clinging. Sorry, throwing a laugh in there.
There's an app for that.
But okay, so I do want to ask about Alcoholics Anonymous, which I'm breaking tradition here by even mentioning them a part of it. But I'm curious if I know you're a big reader and an inquisitive guy, and have you ever read any AA literature, the Big Book or 12 Steps, 12 Traditions?
No, I mean, I'm sure I've read the 12 steps. I know what the steps are, or at one point I knew what they were. And being a well-known atheist, I get the question about just how you can go through AA while not believing in a higher power of any sort, and that never really struck me as a problem. And I think you can just reframe that step in more agnostic terms. I mean, obviously the universe is bigger than you. Obviously, you don't understand how you got here. You didn't make yourself. You're in a context that is profoundly mysterious and bigger than you. So it's not. I don't see a problem in kind of throwing yourself on the mercy of something that transcends your understanding of all the cause and effect relationships that have summated to bring you to this moment. So yeah, but I don't consider myself especially informed about it. I've had a few friends who've gone through it and I've talked to them about it, but I'm not haven't been in it myself or gone deep with it.
Yeah, this isn't an intervention or anything. I don't know anything about your drinking or anything. But I was always curious because obviously I read a lot of that literature, and I read a lot of Eastern philosophy, and they sort of work together into a lot of the same things. And I just always wonder. I'm like, I wonder if Sam Harris has ever read either of these books, because I think you would find them interesting. And I think about that too, because obviously you're known as being an atheist, and I'm a very, though a spiritual guy, also always been an atheist in that I don't think there's an invisible guy. And so I was opposed to that, as many, many people are. And I think that language of God keeps more people out, or many people out of Alcoholics Anonymous, but they're very, I thought you'd at least appreciate that they put in God as you understand him. And we use the acronym sometimes, group of drunks or good orderly direction, spirit of the universe. And I felt the same way, because many times I've talked to people that have serious drinking problems and say, hey, you should come over here. We're doing wonderful things. And they say, oh, I hate God and God sucks. And I'm like, I hate God also. But as you said, it's like, well, to me, it's just not the highest power. I'm not controlling everything. But a lot of those things are in all that Eastern philosophy, because it feels like all that literature in Alcoholics Anonymous, as well as Buddhism, and then when I go to therapy, all this stuff feels like it comes down to really acceptance and letting go. Doesn't that really feel like the crux of all this stuff? And Stoicism, which I know you have, I had William Irvine on this podcast. I'm just poaching all your guests. But
yeah, nice.
I mean, doesn't it all really just come down to acceptance? Let go or get dragged. Do you ever hear that term?
Yeah, no, I do think that you can get more or less everything out of that. I mean, it's another way. The other side of the coin is a recognition of impermanence, right? I mean, nothing lasts, right? Everything is always ending, which means you can always begin again, right? I mean, the anger from yesterday isn't here. The anger from 10 seconds ago actually need not be here unless you prolong it, right? So you can always become willing to start again and to encounter the fresh mystery of your being in the world. And the rest is a story you're telling yourself, about the past or the future. The rest is you grinding your gears unnecessarily, right? It's possible to be happy right now before anything changes, right? And it's and there are tricks for recognizing that. I mean, and the Stoics have their tricks, which again are work at a different level than mindfulness. They're very conceptual. A lot of it is reframing. A lot of it's recognizing, say that, there are lots of bad things that are happening to other people right now that aren't happening to you right now, right? And just think of how grateful you are that's the case, right? Think how much would you pay to be in precisely the situation you're in now, the one you were complaining about to your wife, 5 seconds ago, if, any one of a number of things on the menu of suffering had happened, and which haven't happened, right? If you didn't have the car accident today, you didn't get the cancer diagnosis today, et cetera, et cetera. The truth is, even in the midst of getting the cancer diagnosis, there's that kind of reframing is possible. I mean, we know we all should know where this is going, right? I mean, we're all going to die, and if we're the healthiest and luckiest person on earth, right? Which is to say, if you could live to be 150 in perfect health, that experience would be one where everyone you love is dying along the way, right? I mean, you're going to have friends who die at 90, right? And again, in the best case. So it's just like, nobody gets out of here alive. And the question is it possible to live a truly fulfilling and beautiful and creative and ultimately tranquil life in the midst of that certainty of change? And it is, but the thing that gets in the way continually is our thinking about the past and the future. And our thinking is I think I said this earlier briefly, but it very much has the character of a dream. I mean, it is just like, and this is also neurologically true, it's quite similar. It is just like being asleep and dreaming and not knowing that you're dreaming. I mean, which is to say, being totally confused about your actual circumstance. I mean, the moment you get lost in thought, right? The moment you're trying to pay attention to something, the breath or anything else, or the audience is trying to pay attention to the flow of this conversation, trying to understand what I'm saying in this moment. And yet that mere listening is competing there's something else competing for their attention, which is their own thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking to themselves too, right? I mean, thoughts are arising, which make even just listening to someone difficult. And we all know what it's like. You're reading a book, and you want to read the book, and yet you get to the bottom of a page, and you realize you don't remember anything you just read on that page because you were just thinking while your eyes were kind of blindly scanning the text, and you have to go back and reread that page. And so we're profoundly distractible. That is a kind of dreamscape. It is a kind of psychosis, right? It's a real moment of being lost. I mean, you don't know what you're about in those moments when you're just, fully identified with the next arising thought, right? And I mean, just think of how strange it is to be able to feel bad. I mean, you can think about something that happened 30 years ago and feel bad right now. Like you can be embarrassed all over again or angry all over again just by thinking about that thing that happened 30 years ago. That's amazing, right? It's like, and that's happening all the time, that sort of thing, right? Or more often you're thinking about the thing that happened yesterday, but it's a bad dream, right? So the question is, how long do you want to be asleep and dreaming when it's possible to just be awake and to be enjoying what is true in this moment, which is just that everything is happening all by itself. These thoughts and sensations and perceptions are just appearing. You're not doing any of it ultimately. And this touches the free will question. But anyway, yeah, I hope that addressed something you asked.
No, it does. I appreciate hearing it always, and I love hearing it. I have another question. I got to get to some of these questions, for God's sakes. I mean,
right, I'm gonna be briefer now.
Okay.
I'm gonna just sound the buzzer when I go on too long.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, I enjoy hearing you. So I listened to I confuse the names of the two things. Waking Up, you have these great interviews, usually with meditation teachers or Buddhists, these great philosophical minds. When you're interviewing these folks, how much of this conversation is just facilitating your audience, which is what I feel like I'm doing now? I mean, many of the things, although I'm enjoying listening to you, you're saying many things I've heard you say, but I'm like, well, maybe this audience has never heard this, and this will be great for them. So how much of these interviews is that, and how often are you taking in something going, oh man, I really needed to hear that today? That's a great reminder. When you're interviewing, I mean, I don't even know their name, Joseph Goldstein or whoever you're having on, how often do you need refresher? I mean, going back to AA, we call it a daily reprieve. I wake up, angry and resentful and full of ego, and I have to go here to remind myself. Do you need that, or is it just in you now? Or when you're listening to these people, are you like, right, I totally forgot about that. That's a great point.
Well, it's a little bit of both. I wouldn't say it generally doesn't go so far as them teaching me something fundamentally that I don't know or that had really forgotten. But in certain cases, I'm inviting someone to perform a kind of intervention on me, right? So like some of the people I'm talking to are quite accomplished yogis, right? I mean, they're really they've done more meditation than I have, and they're elders on the path. Whether it's in some cases that could be true of somebody, and I still might not agree with everything they think about the whole project of meditation, right? I mean, it's not these aren't people who I'm just deferring to, but I recognize that they're say like someone like Joseph Goldstein, who's a very good friend, and but he's someone who he's just an extraordinarily wise person who has recognized that there's not much he wants in life, right? I mean, he spends a lot of time on retreat. He spends much more time practicing than I do, and he's done that for much longer than I have, right? So he spent years in India practicing before I met him. I just spoke to a woman, Jetsun Ma, who's a Buddhist nun who spent 12 years in a cave in India, right? Just meditating, right? So it's just an extraordinary woman. Again, I don't think I agree with her about everything. In fact, I know I don't because I have certain expertise that she doesn't have. Right? I mean, she's not a scientist, for instance. But when I'm having those conversations, I'm often inviting someone to uh, tell me that I'm uh, on some level doing it wrong, right? Because part of me knows that the greatest teachers I ever studied with would perform a kind of intervention on me if they were here to do it, right? I mean, they would say that much of what I'm doing that seems necessary to me is on some level a waste of time, right? That I should be practicing more than I am, or that my priorities should be fairly radically trimmed down, right? That I care about things that I shouldn't care about, right? That are totally normal to care about in a Western context, right? Like a career, right? You're just trying to build a business or have a career, or plan vacations and have fun and et cetera, to live a very good, fulfilling life, right? Um, I can imagine an elder brother or sister could intrusively get into my life and say, listen, this on some level you're not going as deep as you might here, right? You're not like you really want to, if you really wanted to stabilize this thing, if you really wanted to never overlook the nature of awareness ever again, you would just focus on that, or just take the next year and just focus on that, right? And I have reasons why I can't do that, right? Like, oh, what's going to happen to my podcast, and what, like, the app needs me, or like, what I've got two daughters, like what's but these are, in many cases, these are people who never had kids, for a reason, right? And they don't have careers for a reason, and they don't. Again, Jess and Ma spent 12 years in a cave, so. Anyway, I'm not living that kind of life at the moment, but I'm available to the criticism from many of these people that I could be more profoundly taking my own advice than I am, right? Like that's. And so occasionally I tend I somewhat invite that in the conversation, and sometimes I get some version of that, or I get the opposite of it. I mean, the truly non-dual retort to everything I just said is, well, there is no difference really between your life and your practice, right? I mean, if you still think that there's something you need to do, like you need to cross your legs and close your eyes, well, then you are not recognizing this thing that I'm talking about, right?
Right.
And I've had those teachers too, and I'm occasionally talking to those people on the app too, where they're not they would disavow any kind of formal practice, because that seems to be a concession that you're committed to overlooking this thing at the jump, right? Like you're just, why are you closing your eyes? Why are you crossing your legs? Why aren't you just checking your email right now if that's the thing you need to do? I mean, you can't recognize this while you check your email. And that's true too. And yet I recognize that, the time is passing very, very quickly. And on some level, you become what you pay attention to, right? I mean, your mind is kind of impressively conforms to the kinds of things you spend, your days and nights focused on. And yeah, so I could be more focused on the nature of mind than I tend to be day to day. And I'm no doubt, some of these people I talk to on the app are in a position to say that to me.
Many thoughts just came in. One, that most recent interview, what's her name? Jessima?
Jessima, yeah.
Jessima. Hilarious moment when you asked her to lead a meditation and she said no.
Yeah.
I was not expecting that.
I mean, it didn't surprise me. I think it surprised many listeners, but I mean, she's very traditional, and she knew what I was asking for. I mean, I wasn't asking for her to do a guided mindfulness meditation, or do a visualization of a sort that it was often practiced in Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, I was asking for the pointing out instruction in Dzogchen, essentially. I wanted her to give that to an audience of a size that she, perhaps couldn't imagine. And she just knew that, I mean, in her traditional context, you don't really do that, right? You teach students who face to face, and they've done preliminary practices before you give these specific teachings, and so she wasn't going to go near that, and so but yeah, it was cute.
It was
how we navigated that.
Yeah, it was comical. But by the way, that reminded me, interestingly, of Alcoholics Anonymous also, in the idea that it's supposed to be more this kind of private thing over here that's not being cast out publicly. When you guys talked about the reasons not to share that insight, it felt like sort of a parallel there, which I'm breaking tradition again. Oh my God, I had another question. Oh, this question is a bit of a criticism. Are you ready for a criticism?
I'm ready.
Oh man, this is exciting. Every interview on Waking Up, I confuse the two. Waking Up, I love them. They're great. And you get into philosophy and meditation. It puts me in a great place. And then you insist on asking about all these whatever Buddhists that have, raped people or whatever. Horrible people. Yeah. It takes me out of it. It's like a 12-minute thing. I don't know. There's just bad people. Can you stop asking? Why do you feel the need to ask? And I guess it's important because people that are seemingly, I guess you can give it context, seemingly, saintly, still take advantage. People do something horrible, but for us at home, I don't care. He's a bad guy. I don't know.
Yeah. It's a strange thing to end on. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It always closes. It's a terrible closer, if nothing else.
Yeah. Well, so, I tend to ask the same question. I mean, there's a little variation, but I tend to, unlike my podcast, where I talk to a wide diversity of people and, ask very different questions depending on the topic. I tend to ask these meditation teachers more or less the same questions because just because, I mean, those topics I feel are, like always relevant for that conversation. And also I have some fantasy of maybe breaking apart the interviews at some point and bringing together lots of different voices on, just one of those questions, say. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I always hope that one of these people has an answer that is fundamentally new on that topic, or that just leads me someplace we haven't gone before in the conversation, because it really is an enduring problem in this space, which is we want to believe, and it is in fact advertised, that there's a close connection and really a necessary connection between spiritual insight and ethical behavior, right? So like if you've had certain insights into the nature of mind, into selflessness, say, the ego is an illusion, and you've practiced compassion, so you feel compassion for all sentient beings, et cetera, as is advocated in Buddhism, particularly. It's imagined that if you do that successfully, right, like you're the Dalai Lama, or you're better still, you're one of his teachers, one of his gurus who might have spent a decade in a cave doing nothing but meditate, and you would be incapable of being an asshole, right? There's just no way you're going to be a rapacious exploiter of your students, right? Stealing their money or having sex with underage girls or sleeping with the wives of the breaking up marriages in your cult, right? All of that seems to suggest that the person is a total fraud, right? They didn't have the insights they claim they had, because there's no way you could do those things having had those insights. And I don't, inconveniently for us, I don't think that's the way the human mind works. I think there are frauds. There are people who are only pretending to have had certain insights. I'm sure that's true, but more inconvenient still, there are people who really have experienced profound things in meditation and have even introduced profound experiences to their students, right? They're very skillful teachers and guides, and they might even be extraordinarily charismatic people to sit with, so that their mere presence kind of bowls people over. I mean, I've been in the presence of a few teachers like that, and I think that really is a real phenomenon. And yet some of these people still behave atrociously, right? And so the question is, why does that happen, and what what can we conclude from it, and how do we prevent that happening going forward in a more modern context in which these teachings are given out? And so anyway, I've talked to people who are out there holding retreats and forming spiritual communities, and they're much more in the role of a teacher day to day. And I just I keep trying to kind of pressure test my intuitions about all that in conversation with them. So it keeps coming up. But yeah, no, it is a bit. I recognize it's a bit of a buzzkill to talk about how whoever Swami Muktananda built a tunnel from his quarters at his ashram in outside of Bombay to the girls' dormitory, and had sex ad libitum with underage girls.
That's just wisdom.
Holy man that he was.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure you'll get to the bottom. Maybe you'll get to the bottom of it one day, and we can move off of that.
Yeah, right. Okay.
That topic, but
or we can come on your podcast, your other podcast, and talk about the details.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds like if you're
exactly, we'll have a good time over there. All right, let me ask. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I have 350 more questions we haven't got to. Some of these maybe are just quicker. Eckhart Tolle. You know that guy?
Totally,
I never hear you mention him. The Power of Now. I mean, is he a fraud? Is he just taking Buddhist stuff? I never hear you talk about him or have him on. But that book seemed. I love that book, and I listen to him. I get a lot of wisdom out of him. Yeah. But what do you make of him? I don't want to cause a beef here. I don't want him to hear this.
No, it's fine. And I've never met him, so I've actually invited him on the app. And I'm not sure if I don't know if he declined or if we just never successfully reached him. But I've invited him, and I would love to talk to him. To my eye, we don't disagree about much with respect to the experience of recognizing awareness. I think virtually everything he said on that topic, I probably agree with. I mean, I think I only read The Power of Now. I think I looked at one of his other books. But the thing where we do disagree is that he's fairly quick to draw metaphysical claims on the basis of this experience, right? And he'll say things about the universe that I consider to just be patently unscientific and untrue, right? So he's not a scientist. He's not a skeptic. He's not somebody who's I view as being sophisticated in how he tries to connect this experience of non-duality with beliefs about reality at large, right? He's more like Deepak Chopra in that respect, where he'll say things about because you can experience this about awareness, something about cosmology, right, on its basis, right? This awareness preceded the Big Bang or something like that. I know I'm not quoting him verbatim, but he has made overreaching comments of that sort that reach into cosmology and other branches of science that I think are illegitimate, right? So I don't think your experience in meditation entitles you to say much at all, if anything, about physics, right? And I mean, the truth is, your experience in meditation doesn't even tell you reliably that you have a brain, right? Much less that is doing anything relevant, right? It's just that those are not the sorts of things you can notice when you pay attention. And so there's just more work to do to understand our circumstance here from the outside, from the third person side, and people like Eckhart and Deepak and many other people in that sort of new age spiritual space don't tend to be rigorous about all that.
Right. Interesting. Another question, another book I'd love to ask you about, Healing Back Pain, Dr. Sarno. Do you know that book? Have you read that book? Thoughts on that book?
I've never read it. I know of it. And so I think I know what he recommends and what he recommends you don't do. And I think, so, some of it sounds a little crazy, but some of it's probably real in that a lot of back pain is a matter of, accommodating the pain and doing all kinds of other things that put your body out of whack, while you're trying not to feel that pain. And it's, so I, having had various martial arts injuries and, in neck and back and hip and et cetera. I've gone down the path of trying to figure out how to be in less pain. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't have any uh, deep knowledge of what he claims and why he may or might be right or wrong.
I think the philosophy of the book is that any pain that's not from blunt trauma or an injury, which would be different. By the way, I practice jujitsu as well. We have something in common: jujitsu and,
nice.
and tinnitus. We have in common.
Oh, good. Well, yes, tinnitus is no fun, but yeah,
No,
but it would be a little bit like saying, this is why I think what you're about to say about Sarno is probably untrue, because I guess it would be possible to say the same thing about tinnitus, right? Like the endurance of this thing, like this is I think they're pain equivalents of tinnitus, right? Where you just have this continuous firing, which some aids as pain, experientially, over which you don't have any control, and it's not born of something you're doing or not doing. Ultimately, like you can be neurologically unlucky, and it might be something that is where the structural basis of it can be difficult to find, or even impossible to find with current tools.
Right.
And tinnitus is very much like that.
But his sort of theory is that it's repressed anger is causing a lot of your pain.
Oh, I missed that part of the thesis. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all repressed anger manifesting as pain, which, it was helpful to me. I never had back pain, but I've had dental pain, tooth pain, side pain, kidney pain. I was a real mess for a long time before therapy, and ultimately meditation really helped a lot. I mean, I'm still a mess, but I remember having an experience where I was having dental pain and my tooth. I thought I need my tooth pulled, and I was really bottoming it out with anxiety and panic disorder. And I had made an appointment with a therapist and a dentist, and I went to the dentist, and he's like, "No, you just need a therapist. There's nothing here." And of course, I went to therapy, and slowly it went away once it was. So I've had, as a hypochondriac, of someone that's had pain and illness manifests a lot of different places. Again, this is what we were talking about with therapy. It's like sometimes it's like, oh, maybe I just am a person that gets that, but there's a root source somewhere from childhood, some kind of mental pain. But I'm not a doctor. I was just curious if you had read the book or had thoughts on it.
The truth is most conditions are self-limiting. So you're going to get this weird seeming confirmation where like whatever therapy you're doing is going to seem to work, physical or talk or any other sort of therapy. It could seem to work because the thing that you've been suffering is going to run its course eventually anyway. And so, and you don't run the control condition alongside it, right? You don't know what benign neglect would have done for that particular pain, right? So, but yeah, I don't discount the possibility that there are emotional components to seemingly just physical suffering. Right. And people have weird experiences, right, on psychedelics and elsewhere where something that's been nagging them, physically for years seems to get unlocked and just goes away in a matter of moments, never to return. And they almost sound like miracle stories. But I don't discount that, because it's everything you experience. I mean, neurologically it's like you're not. The pain in your back isn't in your back, it's in your brain, right? I mean, even if there really is an injury signal coming from your back, the pain component of it is arriving in the cortex, and there are stages along the way where neuroplasticity would allow for you to feel less of it or to no longer feel it, right? Like you can dampen it at any stage along the way, right? And the question is how to do that, and what would conspire to allow you to do that. And there, take the flip side of this. You have something like phantom limb pain, right, where the limb no longer exists, and yet you feel pain in it, right? And that's purely a brain-based problem that would have a brain-based solution. But that would be true if you had a real limb too that was in pain, right? I mean, the pain is no less in your brain. So it's I mean, I wouldn't rule out surprising cures either. So
right, yeah. I mean, the mind body connection obviously is deep. I mean, that blew me away too is realizing like, oh, I can have dental pain or pain in my hip from anxiety that manifests that. And now, what do you think of the theory that, I mean, I guess, which is his theory also, my therapist, is that there's deep emotional pain. I think this is essentially his theory, that there's deep emotional pain that you're somewhere in your subconscious doesn't want to deal with. So it's creating this other pain to focus on. So instead of thinking about how, my father, smacked me in the face when I was 7, I think about my back hurting. Does that not make sense to you?
I mean, generally, it doesn't make sense to me. I'm generally skeptical of a lot of these stories. I mean, there's a kind of a quasi-Freudian inheritance that in psychology that I'm pretty skeptical of. But it's not. I mean, I tend to view it more as there are causal patterns that get perpetuated over time, so that like if something terrible could happen to you in childhood that causes you to react in certain ways in certain circumstances. It causes you to view the world a certain way, or view other people a certain way, or to view yourself a certain way. That reliably produces suffering in the future. But it's not like it's like if you got in a bus accident as a kid and damaged your shoulder, irrevocably, and now you've got a shoulder that's wrecked for the rest of your life. It's not like the bus accident is continually reimposing its trauma on you, or like the experience of the bus accident is unconsciously doing its work again and again every time you wake up with a sore shoulder. No, you have a damaged shoulder, and now your body has congealed on some level around that, and you've maybe ramified it too in how you sort of contract as you try not to feel pain, more pain than you need to as you move around, and so you've become now your spine hurts because you're busy moving weirdly, in defense against your shoulder, etc. So things can get out of whack, and there's a causal story about why all that's happened. But I tend to be skeptical of this idea of the unconscious as this storehouse of kind of psychodynamic movies that are sort of always playing, and we're not aware of them, and yet we can become aware of them, and that the mere awareness of them will just change as our conscious states thereafter. I'm sure there are experiences people have that sort of answer to that, but I'm skeptical of viewing the unconscious mind in that way.
Right. But having stress can cause a headache, right? If you're stressed out, your head hurts.
Having stress, but it's not like, but having stress now is yes, I mean, you can be the kind of person who reliably feels acute stress in all kinds of situations where you need not feel stress, right? Like you can just become a really impatient, reactive, anxious person. And there could be a story about how you became that way. Maybe you have PTSD. Maybe you were in a war, right? And now, any kind of, loud sound or, anything else that becomes suddenly salient just drives your amygdala far harder than it needs to be driven. And you're always just reacting to the world from a position of real stress. Like you're in fight or flight mode, half the time. Clearly that's possible, and there are ways of treating that, but I just don't think the treatment is likely to be if you could only revisit the original, the inciting incident that caused you to be this way. If you could only talk more about it, think more about it, just excavate your unconscious mind that is the storehouse of memory about all that. That is the best path for a cure. I just think that's, again, I mean, I'm actually hopeful that, but the one caveat I would add to that is that I think with psychedelic therapy, some component of that probably make sense because there you're dealing with neuroplasticity and a reframing of the memories, which could be therapeutic, right? So like if you're going to take MDMA and then talk about what happened to you in the war, say,
Hmm.
right? That could be a way of just um, almost giving your brain a firmware upgrade with respect to the memories that are continually available to be reacted to, right? And your sense of yourself as a person as a result of those memories, right? You can just bathe all of that with a very different kind of neurophysiological response, and doing that could create new pathways and new kind of synaptic weights around all of that, and that may be a durable cure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of promise there.
Right. And how do you feel about meditation with with regards to like the immune system? Your immune system, you can get sick less because you meditate. You've kind of talked about these benefits of meditation, and you said even if you found out it was bad for you, you should still meditate. But do you think there's any truth to meditation causing you to have a longer life and more immunity and staying healthy, all these things? Or do you just find just the insight is the benefit?
Well, yeah, there's a long list of what I would consider more, superficial benefits to meditation, which may or may not be valid, right? I think there's research on immune function and reducing stress, and maybe there's some causal connection there, and we know that chronic stress is not good for your immune system. Um, you know, it- for some people it might improve sleep, although for other people it might make sleep worse. Um, it's I think looking for those benefits. I mean I'm convinced that some of those benefits may be valid, but again, those are not the reasons why one would meditate, in my view. I mean, it's
Right.
it's a little bit. I mean, the analogy I've drawn um, to meditation here is it's like learning to read, right? Like it would seem odd to ask the question, is learning to read, does that reduce stress? Is that the reason why we should teach our kids to read? It's because it's good for reducing stress, or it might help um, their ability to communicate with others, or they might be able to fall asleep faster, because reading yourself to sleep is usually effective, right? That's just, I mean, all of that might be true, uh, but and no doubt it is true, but it's just the benefit of knowing how to read. I mean, the difference between being illiterate and being, deeply literate, um, is just, it's so comprehensive. Uh, and it's not even, and the truth is, in that case, is it doesn't even directly track questions of, pleasure and pain, or stress and no stress. Because obviously you can read it, you can decide to read about many things that stress you out, right? I mean, you can just spend all your time reading about the Holocaust and about all the terrible things that happen in the world, and there actually are reasons to spend a fair amount of time doing that. So it's just so much bigger. It's like your life is transformed by an ability to read in a way, and human culture has been totally transformed by it. And certain things are possible only on the basis of a culture that is literate, right? Um, it's one of the biggest things that ever happened to us, right? So, and I would put truly learning to meditate in that kind of category, where it's just a fundamentally different life to be able to recognize what's going on in your mind at that depth, um, and to break the spell of identification with thought. I mean, it's a categorical change, and it's not, and so it doesn't really. So while those benefits might be true, that's not really my area of focus in terms of justifying the project.
Right. Now, have you ever heard this theory? If they taught all the children to meditate in school in 8 years or 12, whatever X amount of years, there'd be peace on earth. You ever hear that? What do you think about that? I think the Dalai Lama or somebody said that. I might be
Well,
paraphrasing.
well, I think it would be better. I mean, I think it's something that you should teach children, and children can be taught to meditate, and it's really pretty wonderful to see a class of 6-year-olds or 8-year-olds learning to meditate, and they get a lot from it. I mean, they don't get everything adults ultimately get from it, but it's just the at the earliest level, it's just basic awareness of what they're feeling. You know, it's like just being able to recognize an emotion as an emotion, right? To recognize that you're sad or to recognize that you're angry. That's already, you know, something that is profound for a kid to be able to just see that they're moved to behave in a certain way based on the way they're feeling, and they can decide to, you know, rethink that or reconsider that. And yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not especially idealistic about you know, teaching everyone to meditate and ushering in some kind of, you know, golden age where we're not witnessing you know, terrifying human conflict anymore. But it it is in fact true that, you know, virtually everything we see in the world that is bad, that is causing, you know, pointless human misery at scale beyond natural disasters and pandemics is something that human minds are doing based on being completely out of control, right?
Right.
So when it is a kind of personality problem we're seeing in play everywhere, right? It's people's, you know, we're seeing the consequences of human thought and the default identification with thought and all the negative emotions that attend that, hatred, probably being fear and hatred being at the top of the heap. And yeah, it's easy to imagine that the world would get much better if people became, far more observant of their inner lives and of the pointlessness of so much of their suffering, the suffering they feel and the suffering they create in others.
Right. Changing gears, and I'm going to let you go here. I swear to God, I promise. I know you're a comedy fan. What do you think of my pal Shane Gillis hosting Saturday Night Live just a few years after being fired from the cast? Are you aware of this? You thought about this?
I heard. I heard about it. I did. Unfortunately, I didn't see his triumphal return.
So it hasn't happened yet. You still got hope.
Oh, it hasn't happened. Okay.
I think it's next.
When is that happening?
Saturday, 20-something, I think.
Okay. Nice. Well, I think he's hilarious. He's a very funny guy. So, and I don't remember the details of his firing. I forgot why he was fired. Do you want to remind me about it? Is that important?
I mean, I don't know if I can. I'll get fired. No, he got hired as a cast member, and then they dug up, resurfaced whatever his podcast at the time. His podcast had a very small audience, and I think it was the main thing that got him. I think was Asian jokes. I think he used some slurs or something. Said something horrible on a comedy podcast.
Said something on a podcast right.
On a comedy podcast and got fired, I think, maybe the day after he was hired, a couple of days after, and now here we are years later, and he's now been hired to host.
Right. Well, I think that's great. I mean, I think he's, I'm hopeful that we have reached something like peak woke and that the pendulum is swinging back. I mean, I don't know if I'm delusional in thinking that, but I feel like I detect the swing backward happening, and that would be a good thing. I think obviously we have just performed this kind of bizarre self-immolation, culturally, which it's easy to see the good intentions at the bottom of it, but it became no less grotesque and unfortunate in the end. I mean, just the cancellation of everyone for everything was more or less achieved. So it's not to say that no one deserved cancellation, but it's yeah. I mean, I think I'm hopeful things are normalizing, and yeah. So that's one sign of it among many.
I mean, are you a hopeful guy in general? Like I said, I listen to the podcast, and it's all very scary, but you always seem very calm. Like, do you consider yourself a hopeful person? You have children. I just had a child.
I have two girls. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it freaks me. I mean, is the answer to just accept that, like, I'll just be happy as long as I can until my children, my child and wife and I die in a horrible fire due to climate change or AI, space aliens, whatever the fuck.
That's eat us. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, do you have hope? Climate change, AI, overpopulation, all that shit?
Well, now it's underpopulation.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
We went from overpopulation to underpopulation pretty quickly,
right.
more or less overnight. Um, no one's ever accused me of being an optimist. I mean, that charge has never been leveled at me by anyone, public or private. But I mean, I have an appetite for the scary parts of life. I tend to focus on all that can go wrong. I mean, that's just, I've been that way for a long time. So it's useful to occasionally recognize that so much has gone right, and this really is the best time to be alive that I think anyone can name. I mean, it's hard to be truly nostalgic for any point in the past when you do the work of looking at the details of what was true in the past. I mean, there's no past, there's no point in our past, in our lifetimes, where life was truly better in the important ways, I would argue. As much as there is to complain about now and worry about now, there's this is still the best moment, and if you go back further than 50, 60, 70 years, it just gets worse and worse and worse, right? I mean, there's just no, there are little islands of prosperity and fun and beauty, but Jesus, I mean, you don't have to go back far before people couldn't even figure out that they should keep their shit out of their food, right? I mean, it was just chaos, right? And so yeah, I wouldn't trade places with any prior generation, and so I'm betting on implicitly I'm betting that the future is going to be better than the past, and I'm doing whatever I can think to do to make that more likely. But it is nonetheless easy to see how things could go spectacularly wrong very quickly, and I think it's worth being cognizant of that and trying to mitigate those risks. So that's what I spend a lot of time doing on the podcast.
Yeah, you do an amazing job with both things, both making sense and waking up. I think you're doing tremendous work. I mean, I'm not here to suck you off, but I think you got to be one of the most important people in the world here. I mean, you're talking about the issues and you're bringing so much, what's that word I'm looking for? Balance to the issues, as well as teaching meditation to a whole lot of people, and just an amazing mental health app. And I swear I'm not getting paid for this. Everyone should go check out the Waking Up app, because it's really tremendous. And you can get it for free, right? I pay because I'm a good person.
Yeah, we have a somewhat unusual business model. I mean, I don't know that anyone has copied it, which is, it's expensive. I mean, it's a subscription, and my podcast too is a subscription. So there's a paywall there. Otherwise you only hear like half of every episode. But if you just send us an email, if you can't afford it, you can have it for free, and many people do that. So I'm just these are digital goods. It just seems like the truly ethical way to have a business in that space, right? I mean, the money should not, someone can't get access to either the app or the podcast. So I'm very happy to be able to do that. And I should say I'm a huge fan of yours and your comedy, and also your the film you made with Louis. I mean,
thank you.
4th of July was I mean, it was hilarious, but it was also deep. In addition to being very, very funny, and you were great in it. So
thank you. Well, thanks for doing a part in it. We wanted to have you in there, and we appreciate you doing it.
That was fun.
There was a bunch of, it's funny, Louis and I have talked about this before, but the whole time, because the movie was basically about my life, to me, I thought we were writing a drama and he thought we were writing a comedy. And looking back, I wish we had put more jokes in, because I really didn't realize how people would react the way they did. A lot of the stuff was funny that I thought was serious because it was about my own suffering. But
so I didn't know that. Is it narrowly autobiographical, or is it just part is biographical, but all the other details are fictional?
It's pretty autobiographical. My mother, I always feel like I have to mention, my mother is not nearly as narcissistic or narcissistic at all as this mother. That was kind of a character Louis created, that mother. My family's much more supportive than that, and my family doesn't say faggot or anything like that. They're very kind people. But it was autobiographical in that I do live in New York and have a wife, and have conflicted feelings about my family, and I am sober, and they drink heavily, and all that kind of stuff. And then my wife and I at the time were trying to have a baby, and we ended up having a baby. So it's sort of like a alternate ending.
Right.
So a lot of it was, and a lot of it was taken straight from real life, and it was
Great.
it was a lot of fun. The reviewers hated it, but the audience seemed to like it. So I'm glad you liked
the
it.
performances are great. I mean, the woman who plays your mother and I mean, the guy who plays your father, they're fantastic actors.
Yeah, pitch perfect. They were
Some
local
of those
Boston.
beats were just unbelievable.
Thank you. Yeah, they were local Boston theater actors, and no, it was a dream come true, and hopefully we can do it again. And can I ask one last question, or just put one last thing to you real quick? Because I wrote this down, and some of the stuff I won't get to. But what does it mean you can't become happy, you can only be happy? I believe I'm quoting you.
Yeah.
Sorry,
and I believe I'm quoting someone else there. I don't think that line's original with me, but it's a very standard insight in contemplative, especially Buddhist circles, but the core of it is that when you look at what you're doing when you're trying to become happy, right? There's this sense that you're happy, you're not happy now, right? Like there's some dissatisfaction now that you're trying to solve for, and so you have some thought about what you can accomplish in the future that's going to make the present compelling enough, orderly enough, pleasant enough, such that the present will be good enough, right? So that this current present, this moment, this time point is not that sort of present. So you have to get there somehow. You have a goal, and that expectation is. It's not that there aren't changes we need to make in our lives that could be for the good, right? I mean, there are many, right? So I'm not saying you don't have to do anything, but the sense that happiness is always elsewhere or going to arrive in the future, again, there's a kind of mirage-like quality to satisfying your desires and to meeting your goals, and in some sense, you really do discover that you never truly arrive, right? Because you're there, the mind you have in looking toward the future, like if that's your posture always, you find that is your posture even when you arrive at the future you've been looking forward to, right? You're always sort of looking over the shoulder of the present moment into the next thing that's coming, and you can't, unless you can stop doing that, you never make contact with your life, right? And meditation is a training, is the only explicit training that allows you to arrive now, regardless of what is left undone, right? Because you're always in the process of doing something. You're always, you're not, on some level, happiness is learning to love the process, right? You can't just love the goals, because the goals just, even if you could extract the pleasure you think you're going to get from them, they are impermanent, right? The goal is this moment in time where you're finally having the meal you've been looking forward to, and now you're in danger of eating too much, or you're trying to figure out how to stay comfortable while you're gorging yourself, and it just doesn't last. It lasts for a couple hours, right? And then you're dealing with the aftermath, and then you're on to the next thing. And so it's the process you have to learn to love, right? You have to learn to be happy looking forward to the thing in the future, right? And you have to learn to be happy making the thing that entails hard work and some uncertainty, right? And you haven't finished yet, and you don't know what the result's going to be, right? It can't be just you can't just be waiting for the result of the thing that took you a year to make, right? So it's a very different mode. Being and becoming are very different modes of attention, right? And being is just the recognizing what the mind is like now when you're not reacting to experience, when you're not trying to change anything, really, when you're just at rest. And the more you can do that, the more you can experience a well-being that is intrinsic to just being aware and being present. And that can be true even under uncertainty, even in the presence of physical pain, frankly. I mean, even when there's an obvious problem to solve and you're still busy solving it, the question is, can you recognize the freedom that is here even as you're working to solve it, right? Even when you're not, even when you're physically uncomfortable and the sensation hasn't left, can you recognize the kind of the openness of awareness and its intrinsic kind of non-contraction and non-conflictedness, right? The lack of complication, the lack of problem, really, even as you're solving problems.
That was a lot to take in, but I think I can do it. You've given me hope that I can be happy even when the space AI, aliens, everybody kills us, whatever the fuck, climate change. What do you think is going to get us? Climate change, AI? What is it?
Well, I'm worried. I'm worried about AI. I gave a TED talk in 2016, I think, on my concerns about AI, and now, many people share those concerns. But in the near term, I'm much more worried about the kinds of things we're going to do with our narrow AI and our capacity to harm ourselves that is growing quickly. I'm just worried about human stupidity first, and then the stupidity, the malevolence or the stupidity of the machines is kind of a secondary concern.
But we can be happy.
It's going to be an interesting year. I think 2024 is going to be more interesting than most years. I'm willing to bet. So,
oh God, if you're nervous, I'm extra nervous. But I think we'll be okay, right? We'll survive. Our children will be all right.
Yeah, I intend to survive. That's the goal.
It's acceptance. Yeah. Just accept, Sam. Trump is going to be president. Just accept it.
Right. Yeah. Well, that'll be possible. It's not what I'm trying to make happen, but
no, I know.
I'm ready for it.
Well, I appreciate your efforts. I appreciate you having taken the time. It's really been fun. And like I said, I really appreciate both the podcast and the app. It's changed my entire existence on the planet. So thank you very much. And thanks for taking the time to be on here, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, great to connect. Yeah. I love what you do. So keep it up.
Thank you. Absolutely. And I got to throw a plug out. I don't know if you've seen my latest. I know we talked about the other special. You promoted my previous special, but I put another one out a few months later called Enough for Everybody. It's on YouTube if you want to check it out.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And
that goes for the audience too. Please, for the God's sakes, watch it. All right, Sam. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'll send everyone to the app. Hopefully you get a big influx from my people.
Yeah. Great. Until next time.
All right. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it.